Thanks for watching my video. Hopefully the pictures told a bit of a story. I wanted to supplement the pictures and the montage with a brief PowerPoint with a little bit more information of the project. So we'll transition over to that. Basically, I received a phone call from a new customer, not a former customer. And he called me, he said, "Hey, my name's Dan. I have an SL70 that needs to be restored, and I'm looking for a guy." And I said, "Okay, that sounds great. I'm, by choice, I really enjoy working on vintage Hondas. Something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and have slowly transitioned from doing maintenance and tech work to vintage Honda builds and restorations, and we collaborated together for a while and decided that we wanted to bring this little guy back to life." So Dan grew up riding an SL70, used to ride it to school some decades ago, and he absolutely loved the bike, is the bottom line. Like most, he wished that he had never sold it, never got rid of it, and from what I understand, he waited years and years and years to basically acquire another one. So anyway, he had a good friend, or has a good friend, I should say, that had one and has had this bike for a very long time. And I guess as of 2023, they decided to sell the bike one sold, one bought, but he acquired the bike and came to me, decided to bring it back. And yeah, here we go. So with any project that I take on, everything is tracked for a reason, obviously. The obvious one is cost. Even if you plan ahead and, source every rubber, know where you're going to get it from, know the approximate cost, every hard part, make sure the bike is complete, and or identify what is missing before you take a single bolt off. There has to be a plan, and the plan can't be in your head with something like this. It's got to be on a piece of paper or on a computer, because if it's not, you're going to miss something. And when you have an engine opened up and all the pieces out, you don't want to wait another week for a bearing or a gasket or a circlip that you forgot to order. So I got this technique from somebody else on the internet. Basically, everything, every item, every component, every piece of part, rubber, everything is put into a spreadsheet. I put the part number down in the description. I color code it orange typically when I order it, and I color code it green once I have it in hand. That way I know it is in my possession. But this is these are a couple snips from his build sheet as to what we needed, what we ordered. It's not all inclusive. There are several other things that had to be ordered. But part of the planning ahead before you take a bolt off is making sure that you can get everything you need for a vintage Honda. So that's a pretty important detail for a number of reasons. There are certain Hondas. This SL70 is a pretty good example. Most of the small ones, SL70s, Trail 90s, Trail 70s, the common ones that they built a lot of, you can typically find parts on eBay if you're staying OEM, or there is various reproduction sources. There are various reproduction sources that you can get these from. However, there are certain vintage Hondas where it is not necessarily guaranteed that you're going to be able to find what you need. So it's important that you do all of the legwork and homework prior to disassembly and spending money and things of that nature. And the reason why I bring that up is I recently did a CB200, and they only made that bike for a couple of years, and I had a heck of a time getting not intake manifolds, carburetor insulators. So the piece of rubber that goes between the head and the carburetor, because mine were cracked, And it was surprisingly difficult and surprisingly expensive to find a good usable set. And you can spend X amount of dollars rebuilding an engine and boring out cylinders and getting Wiseco pistons, and if you can't get a simple piece of rubber or aluminum flange to make it work, it was a tremendous waste of time and money. So be sure to plan that out ahead of time. So anyway, back to the project. Let's get back over here. There are certain things that make the process a little bit easier if you're clear and you decide up front what you want to do here. And the biggest, I guess the highest level of figuring that out with a vintage Honda is identifying the overall goal. And the three options that I typically refer to with people are you trying to restore the bike? Are you trying to preserve the bike, or are you trying to do a custom build? And if you decide which of those three avenues you are going to take, everything else becomes a lot clearer once you know which road you're going to take. And it makes everybody's life easier. And a good example of that is if you're going to restore a bike, typically you're going to use OEM parts, and you're going to pull OEM paint codes. If you're trying to gain the highest valued outcome, in a restoration. If you're going to preserve a bike, you're not necessarily doing all those things. And if you're going the custom route, you're basically doing whatever you want. So it's important that you identify which direction you want to take. And again, back to this project specifically, we kind of went back and forth about painting the bike versus not painting the bike. The initial goal was to just have a good running, mechanically sound bike, which for me, that's kind of what I do and have been doing for a while. I'm not too worried about something like that. But when we decided to start painting and straightening metal, I realized that the scope of the project was a lot larger than I initially thought it was going to be. And the reason why I bring that up is because the second you start spending and allocating the money to make something look new, basically making this go from old blue to new red, every other piece or component that you put on the motorcycle is going to stand out against that brand new fresh paint. So it transitions from not custom and not a preservation, but to a restoration. And the entire time you're planning and assembling and rebuilding, you have to have that in the back of your head, because you don't want brand new paint up against something old. It doesn't look great, and that's something that you want to keep in mind as you build. Several hours just into painting and prepping and priming and straightening metal and body fill and sanding. I have a higher appreciation of paint shops now after this project. We did get a local quote on the body work just for taking it to a paint shop, and it was, in my opinion, extremely high. I don't really understand how it would cost so much. So we decided that I would do the paint work, and that's kind of what we did. When you do a small Honda engine, I would say replace every gasket, every piece of rubber, every circlip. I initially decided to replace the rings and reuse the piston. After pulling the piston, I thought it'd be a good idea to go with an aftermarket brand new piston kit, and that's what we did. The left case cover, those are new, or that is new and available from Honda, so that's kind of an easy piece. You don't have to work it and paint it. What other notes about the engine? Valves. The good thing about these older Hondas is you can lap the valves in. So, depending on the condition of the head, something small like this, you could just buy a new head for relatively cheap. We were trying to keep it as original as possible, so I cleaned and worked the head and lapped in valves. and the bike performs great, starts on the first kick type of situation. The biggest, I guess, preservation issue that I thought we were going to have was actually with the forks. They were in really, really bad shape when I took them apart, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to save them. So that is something I would definitely look into. I didn't even look into seeing if I could just buy new forks for a reasonable price, aftermarket, not OEM SL70 or OEM Honda. But again, these are like little challenges that you want to kind of figure out before you start dropping all the money on parts in a rebuild. And speaking of parts, where do they all come from? So for the SL70 specifically, you can still acquire several of the parts, the majority of the consumables, of things that you would replace on a rebuild pretty much no matter what, rubber and clips and gaskets from Honda. So with the SL70, that's great. That is not always the case with a vintage Honda, but that is the case for this bike. So I would say that's number one. Number two, for us in this project, was Northeast Vintage Cycle, based over on the East Coast. They've been doing it a long time. They're smart on these older Hondas. They have a lot of parts, and everything that I received from them was in tip-top, top-notch shape. And I would not hesitate to reach out to him for more parts on a future build. The biggest sourcing issue we had was actually for the wheels. So there's another thing we kind of went back and forth with. Once we decided to paint, we decided to get new wheels, laced and trued. And that was not as automatic as I thought it was going to be. I believe they were available from Honda, if I recall correctly, or maybe the hoop was, or the spokes, one or the other. But we ended up going with a source from Thailand, and I laced them up, and I took them to a wheel shop for truing, and they ended up coming out really, really nice. But again, just these little details that you really want to think ahead as much as possible before you start tearing into things. Just briefly, lessons learned. I don't know if they're lessons learned. I guess for me, there was a lot of satisfaction, and really for the customer, there was a lot of satisfaction that came of this restoration. For him, this is a long-term, lifetime want that he's basically had through his adult life. And, when you have somebody come to you with that mindset and that attitude, every bolt counts, is kind of like how I would describe that. It's when it's late and you've already assembled a number of things and there's a bolt in your hand and the head has like a nick of rust on it, you take the extra time to walk over to the bench grinder and put it on the wire wheel. You don't just throw it back into the frame or whatever, the engine. And I think that's really one of the things about doing work like this, where you can't be in a rush. And you have to have the space and the organization set up to lay things out and understand that it's just going to take time to get it the way you want it to be. Back to the painting real quick. This is a new venture for me. Again, I've been making things work and run with good compression for quite a while now. Painting and welding are kind of new to me, and I guess my 2 cents about painting and what I learned this past season was do it the right way. If you're going for a piece that you're going to submit into a bike show, I really recommend just doing it the right way. And what I mean by that is go buy a spray gun, assuming you have an air compressor in the space. Go buy a spray gun and don't waste money on the rattle cans and paying for the can. Just go buy a gun, practice, shoot. It's relatively forgiving in the prep and the primer stage. If you mess it up, you can do it again. Once you start shooting base and clear, though, it starts getting expensive. And obviously, you can run paint, you can run clear, and that can be perfect. And then you go to wet sand and buff it, and you can burn through the clear. So it's very I don't want to say tedious. It's something that you got to pay attention to though, and be careful. And again, having the space and preparing things correctly. And by no means am I saying you can't get a nice result without without this setup and tools. I'm not saying that, but I just think that it's easier and you'll be happier in the long run if you just do it right the first time, instead of trying to rattle can it and fight it, and just go with base and clear instead of trying to do a single stage thing. It's not as strong as I shouldn't say strong, protected as clearing something is. Durable, that's probably the right word. And then, yeah, just know your goals ahead of time. Is it custom? Is it a preservation? Or is it a restoration? Because if you choose up front, that's really going to help you get down the right path from the beginning. With that being said, thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed watching the photo montage of this comeback.